Hello?
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention?
Welcome aboard Frank's Magic Bus. For the next 2 hours, Frank Welch takes you on a musical journey with some of the best deep tracks in classic rock history. You'll hear this week's featured artist and a whole lot more.
Woohoo! No, Kelly Clarkson!
Now, without further ado, Frank Welch.
As always, I got to remind you, when you get on board the Magic Bus, don't trip over any hippies there as you board. If you are a smoker or a midnight toker, even a joker, you're going to love our guest, Steve Miller. And Steve put out some fantastic albums around 68, 69. Didn't really hit with the number one hit, though, until 1973, The Joker. And then took some time off, which he's going to tell us about. And fascinating stories about how long it took him and how painstakingly he worked on doing the album Fly Like an Eagle. But now let's have Steve tell us all about his career on Frank's Magic Bus.
Steve Miller Blues Band. Some people, like I said, as old as I am, might remember that whole scene before you hit with Joker and some other stuff in the 70s. But you actually played at Monterey Pop Festival, didn't you, 67?
Yep, yeah, we were there.
But you had what, just put out your first album at the time?
No, we hadn't put our album out yet. But we were one of the main bands in San Francisco.
Which a lot of people don't realize. You were part of that whole Haight-Ashbury thing with the Dead and whatnot.
Yeah. We got there, in 66 and started playing in mid-66 and then 67. And at that time, all the record companies were kind of hovering around us trying to sign me. And I wouldn't sign with anybody until I got complete artistic control. But we got invited to play at the Monterey Pop Festival. So that was a big deal for us, and we weren't really signed yet to anybody. And so we were like, one of the young unsigned bands that had got the big break. And it was a really great day. It was an amazing festival.
What is your one big memory of Monterey? I mean, I guess the easy way, unless it is true, that seeing Jimmy for the first time?
Yeah, there were several things, that happened at Monterey. There was sort of a passing of the torch. There were the Association and those kind of bands played one night. Simon and Garfunkel, those guys, they kind of represented pop music from the past. Otis Redding came and played and was the greatest performer of everybody at the Monterey Pop Festival. It literally knocked everybody out on Saturday night.
Well, as Steve was one of the rookies at Monterey Pop Festival back in 1967, he witnessed a couple of disturbing events, according to him. The egos, the superstar egos, bickering about pecking order and whatnot, and the big up-and-coming hard British rock band, The Who, violently smashing their equipment on stage. He was taken aback by that, didn't like the destruction of good instruments, and still harbors resentment for The Who.
And being extremely angry at them for tearing up their instruments and doing that. I just thought they were just, weasels. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't appreciate it, and I thought they were just a bunch of posers.
You just thought they were just a bunch of hacks doing it for the
I just
for the
thought
buzz.
They were what I've always thought they were, just a bunch of posers. And I never liked Roger Daltrey. I never went for Pete Townsend's theatrics. I just didn't. I was more about music than I was about, the show that they were about. And when they tore up their instruments, I'm the kind of guy, I don't like to see somebody tear up instruments. I'd rather give them to kids, and so that's the way I took it. I didn't like it.
Who wrote that song about that a few years ago? Was it John Hyatt, A Perfectly Good Guitar?
Probably. Yeah, right, yeah.
Just the other day, just by chance, I was listening to the Monterey Pop thing, and you were there, so you answer this. Mama Cass, Crosby, all up on stage, their rap was, "Have you heard the Bloomfield Band?" That was like the big buzz, and they were saying up on stage, Mike Bloomfield's going to be the next big thing. Do you remember him blowing people away?
Mike had the Electric Flag, and that was their debut. And they were this band that was extremely hyped. And Buddy Miles was on drums, and Barry Goldberg was playing organ. I knew a lot of the guys in the band. I knew Mike pretty well. But they were not really what they were hyped up to be. And, in fact, we played just before them on Saturday afternoon, I think was when we played. Mama Cass and Stephen Stills and all those guys were all in this just ego fight with each other about who was going to close the show, who was the biggest band, who was this and that. And they were all like they all missed the point of the whole festival. And as far as I was concerned, and with Hendrix and Otis Redding there, you had to be really, really great. And they just weren't that great. Janis Joplin broke out that day and played twice and was amazing. There were some really great performances. So just, dressing like a pop star and having a couple of pop tunes and going out and doing your stuff really wasn't what that festival was all about. Little spoiled kids fighting with each other and about who was going to follow who, and everybody. That was a very ugly kind of egotistical mess. That part of the festival was not really happening.
I think you're right, because as I listened to Monterey the other day, I'm listening to, it is so funny, at the time I started cracking up, David Crosby, between every song, went off into this tangent diatribe about the Kennedy assassination, about McCartney being quoted in Life magazine about acid. It was like, Crosby took over the stage.
Well, Crosby was high on speed and drugs. He was a drug addict, out of control. That was
he kind of sounded
what he was,
like
and when people are like that, they're usually not very good or very smart, and they don't perform very well, and they're not very interesting, and Crosby was intolerable. He was, conceited, thought he knew everything, he was at his worst. Did you ever read Crosby's book?
I read a lot of it, yeah.
Well, God. I think he admits all that later.
Well, he sounds pretty.
They were not pleasant people to be around. They weren't friendly. They were very competitive. They were competitive with each other. They'd stab you in the back to get your place on the stage. And I was just a kid watching it. I was just a fly on the wall. And that was my take of the whole thing.
And as we continue our one-on-one conversation with Steve Miller on Frank's Magic Bus, Steve has been talking about the Monterey Pop Festival, the first iconic major rock festival in the USA in the Summer of Love in 1967. It was the breakout weekend, imagine this, of both Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, the same weekend to the USA audience. And Steve talks about later doing gigs with both of them, Jimi and Janis, at times, though, that both appeared in deep trouble with alcohol and drugs.
Janis Joplin was a great artist, and I played with Janis, a little bit before she died, and her management, I thought they should have all been put in jail. She had been addicted to heroin. They had put her in rehab for 14 days or something, and brought her out, and she was back on the road. She was drinking a fifth of gin a day, and they were going, "Isn't it great? She's all clean and sober now." And I was just looking at them, going, you people ought to be put in jail. You're going to kill her, for what? For money. And, same thing with Hendrix. He was, total junkie before he died. I played a gig with him in Temple University, a couple of months before he died. And he was so far gone by then that it was just, it was so sad. I just wanted to take him home and get him well. But he was surrounded by mafia thugs with guns, and they were pointing guns at people. I had a guy pull a gun on me and tell me to get off the stage at that last gig,
Was he one of Jimi Hendrix's guys?
Yeah. He was totally controlled by a bunch of mafia thugs when he died.
As we continue our conversation with Steve Miller, we flash forward to the mid-1970s. He hit number one of the charts with The Joker in 73, then took almost 2 years off to record which might have been the perfect album for the bicentennial year of 1976, Fly Like an Eagle. And it has sold millions and millions of copies. But it was going to be a double album. He had that much material. He had that many great songs. But in one of the smartest marketing moves ever by a musician, he held back half of the music and released it the next year as a different album. So Fly Like an Eagle in 1976 and Book of Dreams in 1977. And eventually Steve put out a bonus deluxe edition of Fly Like an Eagle with alternate takes, which I highly recommend. And Steve tells us if you want to record the perfect rock album, sweat every detail and become a rock and roll hermit.
And I was living by myself, working on tunes, living in a house by myself. I wasn't married. I didn't, have a wife or any kids or anything, or dogs or pets or anything. I was just totally obsessed with my work. I had cut my band from the Joker loose, so I didn't have a band. And when I finished it, I took it down to Capitol Records, and I had 2 slides. I had the front cover and the back cover and the tape. And I flew down to L.A., went and talked to the president of Capitol Records and handed him the record, and I said, this is going to sell 4.5 million copies. Here you go. And we went and got an art director that day, and we put the album together that fast, zip, zap, boom, bing, bang. And I didn't tell him about the other record for a while.
Wow.
Except I did tell him, I said, and I have another album to follow this up, and it's almost finished now. And they looked at me and gave me that smile like people do when you hand them something and say, this is going to be the biggest record of your career, of your career as president of Capitol Records. This will be your most successful record. I got this kind of nice, smile. Okay, yeah, great, sure. And I was just so sure of that record when it was done. I'd spent 18 months redoing it and polishing it and making sure that all the performances I captured were spontaneous and fresh, and I just was not going to stop until I had that record the way I wanted it, and I didn't have a producer, I didn't have an engineer, I didn't have anybody. And then when it was all done, I took it to Jim Gaines, and we mixed it in 17 hours, and it was finished.
What can people expect in that thing as far as extra tracks or whatever?
Well, we've been going through the vault for 2 years, just transferring everything from analog, making analog copies of all the material of 40 years of recording. So we went in there and we found a bunch of interesting things. And for this particular release, we've got a version of Fly Like an Eagle from 1973. The real version was released in 1976, so this is an early one.
We are talking with Steve Miller on Frank's Magic Bus about how he recorded Fly Like an Eagle and about how by 1976, when it came out, he had been off the FM radio radar with really nothing new to play for a couple of years.
The bicentennial summer, 76, I was going to get a 6-pack of beer. I was a young truck driver, and I was heading down on a Sunday, and they played Rockin' Me the very first time I heard it, and I go, wait a minute, who in the heck is this? The hooks are just popping off the speakers and everything. And I hadn't heard much from you on the radio as far as hits at that time since late 73 and The Joker.
Well, The Joker was 73, and that was a big #1 single, and I was so fried. I'd been on the road for 11 years doing 250 cities a year. And when I got back from The Joker, I had a check for, $300,000 in my junk mail, Stuck in between the magazine subscriptions was this little check, and I went,
I want to get that kind of junk mail sometime.
I tell you what, man, I mean, #1, I was stunned it was still there. Because, I'd been on the road for 6 weeks when I got back, and there was just all this crap all over the floor, And I found the check, and I called up my agent and said, well, that's it. I'm not touring this year. Forget it. And what are you talking about? You've got it. And I said, man, I need a break. I need to get a house. I need a lot of stuff, and I got the wherewithal to do it. So I bought a house, got a little 8-track studio, set it up in my house, was going to take a year off. And I took 18 months off, and I wrote most of the songs for Fly Like an Eagle and Book of Dreams all at the same time.
Talking to Steve Miller about the 30th anniversary reissue of Fly Like an Eagle. And at that time, synthesizers were all over a lot of albums, but when you think of the Fly Like an Eagle album, you think of it all just being synthesized all over the place. Beautifully, though. It's great. Steve tells us how high-tech that thing really was.
I went down to my local music store in San Rafael, California, to Bananas, and said, I want a synthesizer that no self-respecting keyboard player would even touch. I want a simple, plain one. I want one that sounds like an oboe. I want one that's got wind in it. I want one that has this and that, all these pre-selected stops. And I don't want the $8,000 model that nobody can figure out how to run that sounds like a buzzsaw. So they gave me this little roll-in thing that cost like $230. I took it home. I started playing with it. And the last day that Fly Like an Eagle, when we were doing preparing the final tapes to go to Jim Gaines to mix, and we were listening to our rough mixes that we were doing, I said, I want to take this little synth and I just want to do some overdubs. Give me 2 more tracks, and I'll do this. So Fusero, who was the San Francisco engineer, said, okay, here you go. They played me the mix of Fly Like an Eagle, and I did all the synth work over it as it was going by, just in one pass.
You did not rehearse that thing? That was like an afterthought, more or less?
Well, I mean, I've been thinking about it forever. So, hey, everybody, it's Stevie Guitar Miller, and you're listening to Frank Welch, your favorite DJ.